All right, welcome back to Overengineered, the podcast where we ask the question, what's the absolute best way to do things we already have a perfectly acceptable solution for? Today, I am here with John Drexler and Dan Matthews, and this is kind of a reaction to a conversation that started on Bluesky about running small teams. So that's where the conversation is headed. But before we get there, do you two want to say a quick hello and introduce yourselves?
John, after you.
Oh, okay. Great. Hi. Hello, everybody. My name is John Rudolph Drexler. I am a product manager, and I run an agency called Thunk with Daniel Colborn. And we, aside from product managing a lot of our own stuff, we also do product management as a service. And that's one of the things that I do with InterNACHI a couple days a week. And Chris and I have lots of long over-engineered conversations about how we do product management and prioritization and stuff like that at InterNACHI, which is really fun.
Cool. My name's Dan Matthews. I'm head of engineering at a little company called Social Sync. We build fundraising software for charities, mostly UK-based ones, but we do have a few US-based and Australia-based ones at the minute. And yeah, we're a small team. It's my Bluesky post that triggered this little conversation we're about to have. I have questions that I'm sure that we could talk about for hours. Yeah, that's me. Lovely to.
Which is also
to
funny because I saw your thing, and then you and I started chatting about like, oh, we should just jump on a call and talk for 30
Yeah.
minutes, and like I'll just hear about what's going on with you and give whatever feedback I can. Then Chris is like, how about we do this in public? It's like, great.
How
All
about
the better.
we record this? Let's record this and let everybody
Yeah.
else hear it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, I love to. I don't know. I think this is a so the basic question essentially is just um, running a small software team is different than running a big software team, right? And a lot of the advice that you see out on the internet tends to be, coming from the Facebooks of the world, where it's like, okay, when you're running an engineering team that's got, hundreds of people in it, obviously a lot of processes have to be very different. Um, and I know that that's something that I struggle with all the time is just like um, filtering all the advice and best practices that come through the lens of like how much of this actually applies to our organization, right? Both in terms of size, in terms of scope, in terms of sort of like I don't know vibes and priorities and all these different pieces. But certainly size is a huge one that comes into play. It's just like okay, this advice makes sense. There's got a lot of like it's got a lot of just like common sense behind it, but it also kind of feels a little like it doesn't make sense for us, you know? And like where do you draw that line? Does that kind of resonate with where you're coming from, Dan?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously the first thing that you go out searching for, how do I manage my software team? I think one of the problems is that I've came from working in an agency to working for myself and only having to manage myself, and then suddenly being at the head of one person, then two people, then three people, then four people, then five people, and now I have to coordinate all those people in the best way that I possibly can, as well as getting some work done myself, which is always a challenge. And you go out and you search for these methodologies, and you see ones that are really heavily tied into particular tools. So you see Basecamp and their sort of shape up methodology. You see we use Linear as a sort of issue tracking tool, and Linear has their own sort of set of posts on the Linear methodology and how it works. But they're all predicated on these things of like at Basecamp we run these teams of 3 developers with 1 designer each in 6-week sprints, and it's like we have 1 designer that we share between between everybody, and sometimes another company as well. And you try your best to filter some of the best parts of each methodology into your day-to-day practices, and you try things, and sometimes things don't work, and then you try different things and sometimes they don't work. But it's very difficult to find any advice out there for running a small team, and we're kind of an awkward size. You see a lot of people who are just two people, two guys just working on a startup, both technical, or maybe one designer and one developer. You see that a lot. You see a lot of teams of 20, or where they have sub teams of 2 or 3 people, but you don't see a lot out there that's sort of targeted towards the size that we're talking about, 3, 4 people, 3, 4, 5 people. And it's really interesting to me. And, is it just because people who are running these teams of these sizes don't have enough time to go out and speak and write down what they're doing because they're so busy? It certainly feels like that at times, but yeah. And then, like I say, when I jumped in the call, I thought Internachi, your team, Chris, was much bigger. So I was kind of like, oh, Chris is going to bring like the big team perspective, and then John's going to bring like the smaller team perspective, and try and find some sort of middle ground. But I'm actually really happy to find out that you know my pain a little bit with a smaller team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Internachi ships enough code that you might assume that they're like a 10-person team.
Yeah, I mean, Chris himself ships enough code that it kind of puts me and 4 other developers at our team a little bit to shame.
Yeah.
Internachi as a whole, I was convinced there was at least 10 people at least.
That's funny. Yeah, no, it was me for probably 6 or 7 years, and then me and one other dev for the next almost decade, and now it's 3 of us. And we have help, and John helps out on the product side now, which is really great. And obviously the switch to Laravel in the last decade or so made a lot of things easier to do efficiently. But yeah, it's just a small little group of us. So I definitely know those exact pain points. And I think that, John, having you here is like such a great, when this conversation started happening on Bluesky, I was just like, this is the perfect sort of group of people to be talking with, because you've worked in organizations that have big teams or bigger teams, right? And you still work with organizations that have big teams. But you also, Thunk is a relatively small developer organization, right? And you work with small groups as well. So you have like a lot of really great perspective that I think will be super useful.
Yeah, I also think that I think we know this kind of intuitively. I don't have numbers to back this up, but I did a bunch of research right when we started Thunk to look at a whole bunch of companies who use Laravel, and like it seems like the overwhelming majority of like companies that use Laravel have the like 2 to 6 person dev teams. Like that is like definitely the median. There's a handful of big shop, like really big companies. And I'm leaving out agencies here. I'm thinking more in terms of like companies who make products, that they tend to have these smaller teams. There are like solo founders. There's a handful of big ones, but like the big middle of Laravel is these like smaller teams. So I think this is relevant probably to like pretty much everyone who's listening.
I just pulled up the State of Laravel 2024 survey. I don't know how representative this is, but they're putting it at 45% are in that like under 5. 15% 1, and then you got like a small percentage in the 50 plus and a little bit in the 20 plus.
I think Laravel LLC themselves were only a fairly small team until
for a long time.
everything took off. They were. I'm trying to think of everybody involved, but I would think 10 or less at least. And they got so much done. I remember. I think I asked. I can't remember who I asked. I asked one of the team that I was talking to about Laravel Cloud what they use, and they said they use Linear, but I'm sure they used to use something else. I'm sure Taylor mentioned that they used to use Basecamp or something. And I thought there was quite an interesting shift there, that they'd maybe shifted from the smaller team to now that they're the bigger team with sub teams and things, that they had moved to Linear. And I thought, that's quite interesting. Maybe because we've kind of looked at Basecamp as a possible way to go, and it kind of fits in with the wider company. I was just saying to Chris before we started recording, John, that we have an agency side to our company. So the fundraising agency that works directly with charities to kind of raise money. And we're kind of like the software arm, the software sub team. So there's 5 or 6 of us in the software side of it, but there's sort of 20 to 30 people on the other side of the company that we roughly collaborate with in certain things. But it is very much separate. So we sort of thought, wonder if we could roll Basecamp out across the entire thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Can I just give my hot take, which is, don't do that. Basecamp is garbage.
It's really funny. We used to use it. When I got my first job, it was making Drupal websites at an agency, and we used to use Basecamp. So I've used like Basecamp 1, Basecamp 2, all that sort of stuff. And I think I just pine for the simplicity of it. Sometimes it's just like all you can do is send messages, and I haven't used the most recent one, so apart from a little play around. But yeah, that's interesting that you would say that. I do think sometimes I think that a new tool will solve the problem. I don't know if that's like it. I always think like, we'll just get a new tool, and that'll
It's
solve
what
all
every
our
developer
problems.
dreams of.
Just a new thing,
and it's
a new
just
thing.
not it doesn't line up with reality.
No.
Let me give like one just like overarching opening thought, and then I'll ask a question. And Chris, I don't know how tacky it is for me to be like basically paraphrasing that talk that I just did at PHP Philly.
Go for it.
But I just did a talk at PHP Philly about this, and not about this exact topic, but basically captures my thoughts about it, which is that after implementing systems and processes for teams about this, a lot of teams about this size, and then also some much bigger teams, but my overarching thought about it is that the exact software that you use, the exact tools you use, I care a lot less about. I've seen plain text documents work extremely well for teams as big as 5. And I think that that's completely fine and reasonable. The thing that really matters is that you have a systematic way to address your problems and introduce processes that actually solve your problems. And that is the part that really, really matters. And especially at a smaller team, adopting, I guess it's not especially true at a smaller team, for any team, adopting and maintaining any processes that are not productive for you is unbelievably expensive and wasteful, and also a good way to make everyone really mad. And so I actually think that it's quite dangerous to adopt a like productivity methodology wholesale without like seriously questioning almost every part of it. And so my suggestion really is not to say like, oh, adopt linear along with like the entire linear ethos. I think what really matters is that you and your team have a process that I would suggest doing a retrospective regularly to surface all of the things that are not working, and to address them, because you already know, as you've already mentioned, you have this extensive menu of solutions. You have all these brilliant blog posts, all of this like stuff that DHH has written, some of which is, I honestly think, quite smart. I don't agree with all of it. I don't use all of it. You've got the brilliant minds behind like the original Agile Manifesto, and you've got a million things that you can reach for. You shouldn't do all or most of them. You should instead develop a process by which you can say, you know what is wrong with our team this week? It's like, I have no idea what you are working on, and thus we like stumbled over each other with a bunch of merge conflicts. Why did that happen? Let's like understand why it happened and implement the most lightweight solution from our long list of, our long menu of solutions. Let's implement the lightest weight one of them, see how it goes, and check back in next week to see if it actually solved the problem. I think that if you are doing that and you're doing that well, and everyone on the team is able to be honest about what's not working, then what will happen is that you will organically land on a process that works perfectly for your situation and your group of team members that might look completely different from mine. And if it looks different from mine, that's actually a sign. That's a good sign, because every company who I've done this with, we landed on something a little bit different. And even earlier today, Chris and I were like feeling an itch to change something kind of foundational with how we do this. And we did have to like hash it out over the course of an hour, but we like landed on, I think, a really lightweight thing that is honestly different from anything I've ever done with any company. And to me, that's a sign that we're really thinking it through and we're solving the problems that matter for us, and not over engineering a solution and introducing a bunch of process that's like, well, DHA told us to do this, so we're doing it. It's like, no, that's, we don't do anything just because, someone smart on the internet said it. Anyway, that was a lot of rambling thoughts. My question then for you, I mean, you feel free to respond to that, but my question then is like, what are your problems? Like something or some set of things got irritating enough for you that you posted about it. And so my question is, what are those specific things?
So I think we have done some of this. We just haven't named it. We haven't called them retrospectives. We've done calls at the end of our cycles. So one thing that we do use from Linear is we do these 3-week cycles with 1 week cooldown, where we sort of take that week cooldown to do things like, tasks that don't fit into delivering features but have been sat on our to-do lists. One of the things, and it was funny you mentioned merge conflicts there, but one of the things that we kept hitting was we would put all of our work in progress onto a dev branch, and then we would merge that into master to deploy it. And we ended up doing these huge merges, and we sort of talked about it. We all sort of decided that this was a problem. We looked into potential solutions, and we ended up looking at trunk-based development. That we made that change one day at the start of a cycle. We all really invested in it. And I think that's the key, is getting everybody in the team to kind of to buy into this idea before you. Otherwise, if you implement it and one person or two people thinks it's a bad idea, they won't buy into it as easily as other people will, and that friction stops the solution taking hold. We did this, people really bought into it, and then 2-3 weeks later, when we came to do our next release with our next set of features, it was really, really easy. And we were like, right, okay, this was amazing. This was a great choice for us. I'm not saying that everybody should do it or whatever, but like, this is a great choice for us. We should have done this so much earlier. Now we use that process. It's what we know, and it works really well for us. And I've never had to do that thing of, oh, we need to do this release. Okay, now I'm going to have to sit for 5 hours and look at merge conflicts because this gigantic merge is happening. Yeah. And obviously that was caused by, other problems and things and workflow problems, but we identified the problem itself. We implemented what we thought was the most lightweight. There's probably other things that we could have done, like release more often, but in our situation, It wasn't going to work like that. We did it. We fixed it. So I think the problems that we have.
Well, but pause real quick on that also, just because I think that's a beautiful example because of what you mentioned about the buy-in thing, which is like, it's such a critical part of this is that I think a lot of, at least in my experience, the times when you really get buy-in is when everyone experiences a problem together. And then you go, we're going to introduce this new thing. And this thing is a pain relief for the thing that the pain we all just experienced together. And that's why I think like retrospectives or whatever process you use to do that are so effective, is that like, if you just came in, if there was no discussion and you just had an epiphany one night, oh, we got to do this thing to solve this problem, and you came in and threw it down on everyone's desk and said, we're going to go do this thing differently now, even if it is the right tool for, all else equal, people be pissed off. People be annoyed to just like get that kind of, it's perceived as a mandate or something. And it's like, now not only do I have pain, I also have this new crap that I have to do. And instead it's like, no, it's like this group discussion where you're like, okay, we all just experienced pain together. Now let's find a way to alleviate the pain together. You get real buy-in. And, as you mentioned, it's like, if you don't have that, the process isn't going to work. And if you do have that, the process is much more likely to work. So I just want to pause on that because you said that, and I was like, yes, that's exactly it.
And
well, I also
sorry, Chris.
No, I just was going to say I think this is actually a really interesting place where the team size comes into play, because at large organizations you can't necessarily do something like that in the same way that you can in a small organization. And on the flip side of that, in a larger organization, you can and you kind of have to get away with more like top-down mandates, even if they're not necessarily as successful because you don't have the same kind of buy-in. But like in a big organization, sometimes decisions just have to be made at like a central higher level and passed down. And as long as you get enough buy-in across the organization, the people who don't love whatever that decision is, like, kind of get evened out in the scale, right? Whereas in a small organization, it goes both ways. It's like you can get away with doing a more sort of democratic decision-making process. And one person being really hard set against a process has such a bigger impact on the success of it, right? So I think it's just like an interesting place where I actually think this question of how do we manage small teams, like this is exactly that. Like when you have a small team, I think one key thing is you need to really account for the individual people on your team in a different way than you would if you were in a big organization with hundreds or thousands of developers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a range of skills. We have. I mean, everybody's pretty level now, but a year ago we had brought in people who were juniors, and now they are some of our best developers. They are absolutely. I'm constantly blown away by how much they have learned and things in the past year. And one of those things is, I will say that, and I will answer your question, John, but one of those things is that I will say is that I have definitely brought in some of those things in the past, in the sort of past 2-3 years of, hey, we're doing it this way now. And the other people would be, well, Dan's in charge, so that's what we're doing now because he knows best. And I'm just, I'm maybe picking ideas from different places and trying and thinking, oh, that might be a good way to do things. So a good example of that is I kind of got sick of what of a mess our inertia JS components were, the sort of organization. And I was reading a lot of things online about it. And I was like, atomic design is an amazing thing. So we're going to split all our components up into atoms, molecules, and I can't remember the other level. And I think that lasted about a month. So now we have some components that are in there that are, because it's so subjective. It's like, I think something should be a molecule or an atom. It's a silly example, but it is a kind of thing of like, we tried this thing. It wasn't as democratic as the trunk-based development stuff. It didn't really stick because people didn't really get it, probably because we hadn't had those discussions, and it also maybe just wasn't the best fit. But I'm kind of okay with the fact that we tried it. We had to try something. Didn't work, and it, the only tech debt we have from it is that things are in weird folders. So it's not the end of the world. But to answer your question, John, finally, that's my thing. I zig from a question for about 10 minutes and then I come back to it once everybody's forgotten about it. So I apologize. Our biggest thing is that, and again, this plays into the strengths of small teams, is that having a small team working on a bootstrap startup is immensely powerful because you can pivot very quickly from one thing to the next. And that has helped us as a company be able to react to certain things that have happened in the nonprofit industry, be able to jump into new opportunities and new spaces really, really quickly. So that's fantastic. But what it leaves is almost kind of a disjointed roadmap, I guess. So this is where we're coming back up to the sort of product level. And so I'll give an example. We create fundraisers on Facebook. That was kind of one of our biggest selling points, was one that we were one of the only Facebook partners that could create Facebook fundraisers using their API. There's about us and about 3 others. We fought really hard to get them to give us that, but then all of a sudden Facebook I'm not sure if they did it in North America, but in Europe they started taking payments using PayPal, not Facebook's own transaction service. And us and all of our competitors were immediately sort of, oh my God, like, how are we going to alter our ingestion and our importers to do this? And there was 3 of us and we did it in something like 3 days because we could just pivot like that. But I think it's very chaotic. And I think those are the kind of problems that we have, is that I feel like we don't have 2 things. I feel like that we don't have a process for taking a feature from an idea to putting it into the app. And then, and aside to that, and really where the question comes from is that because we're missing somebody who can guard that process and say, if we put a process in place and we say that, if we take something like Shape Up by Basecamp, for example, just as an example, their whole thing is that you pitch a feature and then you wireframe it, but you never design it. And then once it's been approved or you bet on it, then you start doing things like designs and scoping out the feature with developers and everything like that. If we were to implement a process like that, my question would probably be, is there a way that we can get the entire team involved in protecting the process? So if somebody tries to jump, somebody from the product side of the company tries to say, we need to put this this feature into the app very, very quickly. Do we need a product manager or a project manager that can act as like, whoa,
Yeah.
their guys are mid-cycle right now. We can't just change. And
Right. Yeah, and it's
because
difficult.
we've never had that, it's difficult to know if that's something that we need.
Totally, and it is not. I think in a more naive part of my career, I would say like, oh, every developer should just like learn how to do that for themselves. I think that I still think that there's truth to that, but it's also like it is not easy. Even just the like mental mode or like context switching of like you're just like hardcore hacking away for a few days and like suddenly you have to like jump into like an executive conversation about like priorities and roadmap, and it's like it's not easy to do at all, even if you're like fully capable of both. Just like jumping between them multiple times a week is like actually quite difficult. um so I think that's true, and whether you need a dedicated person, i I don't know. I don't know enough about your exact situation, but I will say I think that there are questions you can ask as a developer that can help you get closer to it. And like one of the questions actually that I asked Chris, like when we first started, was like, can we write down the goals? And I ask this to developers a lot, and I'm surprised by how often the answer is no. But I'm like, do you have like a really clear sense of what the goals for your team are and like what the goals are company wide? Because if you have a sense of what those are, then when those new things come up, it's a lot easier to have like an objective conversation with the other people in the company about like, well, hold on, like we are dead set on profitable growth right now or whatever. And you're like, clearly we have like 3 awesome projects queued up and scoped that we're like ready to do. And this new thing came up that, so and so said we have to do, but this like, on the merit of the goals that we all agreed on, this doesn't make sense directionally. And you don't have to kind of like make the argument from first principles. You get to kind of point at a thing that was something that hopefully like was agreed to organizationally. And I find that extremely helpful, and that's how I resolve most of those situations. And like the question of like, man, you said earlier, like things feel like it's cool that we can respond to things fast, but like, how do we know if we're working on the right stuff, or we get this kind of whiplash from jumping between different, competing priorities? And I'm like, all these things get a lot easier if you have a clear sense of what your goals are. And well, I'm curious what your experience is with that, because when I ask even people at like really good companies, I'm like, do you know like what direction your team is supposed to be swimming in right now and why? And they're like, not really. And it's like, I think that is a very, very valid thing for you to like demand from the other people you work with, or your bosses, or the CEO, or whomever.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and it's definitely a conversation that me and the owner of the company have had many times. I think
I'm not trying to stir up conflict over a podcast.
Yeah, don't know. It's really funny because we've had similar conversations, and the one time that the team is swimming in the same direction is when we have a very clear goal. So at the minute we have a feature to ship before a certain deadline, and we are all extremely we all have our sights on that particular goal and what that entails, and the pieces of that goal and where it brings it together. That's really nice. Everything you've said there, I think I would 100% agree with. I think sometimes the part that I think I'm struggling to find is maybe the practicalities of that. And I think this is maybe where we can flip this back around to you both and say, what does the process of shipping a feature at Internachi look like, or with one of your clients, John? Where does it start? Does it start as, here's a full design that we've done? Here's a full
Spoiler
design
alert,
that somebody's
no.
done. Yeah. and I would love to know what the sort of, I'm not saying that I'm going to take what you guys do and completely copy it or anything like that, but I struggle to find real examples out there of what smaller teams do on a day-to-day basis, whereas you can read a full book from somebody at Facebook on how they run their team. Comes back to the original thing.
I had a few things that I just want to chime in with. One is just sort of going back to the sort of premise of your question. Like, I think, oh my gosh, I'm just like totally blanking out on what I was going to say. This is such great podcast material. Like, I think that a process, like just picking a process to sort of reiterate what John was saying, is not going to get you anywhere, because it's not actually, in my experience, the process that solves the problem. The process is like the vehicle for the solution. It's not the solution itself. It's getting like buy-in from the right people, right?
Yeah.
And so you could go ahead and you could implement any one of a dozen established processes, whether it's the shape up process or something else, and you could get everyone on your team to be like, okay, we're not gonna start on anything until we've got wireframes and whatever, right? And then your boss comes to you and says, I need this by next Tuesday. And you say, oh, I guess we have to do what the boss said. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really matter if key folks who have decision-making power aren't bought in, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that what the questions that you're asking make a lot of sense, because you need to have, like, I think John described it as like a menu. you need to have a menu of solutions to like select from when you get to the solution point, right? So I don't think that it's not worthwhile to talk about solutions, but I just don't think that, I think you could pick the most perfect solution for your team, like something that just like a process that just everyone gets and everyone loves and like maps perfectly to how the like you and 4 other developers think. And you could, but like you don't have buy-in from some product decision folks, and it doesn't matter anymore. You know what I mean? So I think the flip side of that is, quite honestly, I think that if you have buy-in from the folks that matter, the process that you pick ultimately doesn't really matter, because like if people are bought into the process, it's going to work. You know what I mean?
All
and
those
that's not to say that there aren't good,
because they worked for somebody, right? Like,
yes,
yeah.
Any of them could work.
Yeah. And just like design patterns, right? We design patterns are useful because, other people have thought long and hard about problems, and they've come up with sort of like reproducible solutions that are easy to talk about. And like, because a bunch of people understand like what the factory pattern is, you can just kind of like use it as a shorthand to talk about like this whole problem space. Like productivity and process solutions are the same thing. It's like, yeah, maybe the shape up process is going to be great for your team because there's a book that people can read, and then everyone's kind of on the same page. Like it's certainly worthwhile, but I think that like ultimately it kind of comes down to getting like the people who are eventually making the decisions bought in, right? And I can say that this was true for me personally, right? Like when John started working with us at Internachi, he brought up this whole question of goal setting. And honestly, John, I kind of rolled my eyes at you. maybe not to your face, but I was just like, oh my God, we're gonna like do all this like this bullshit, right? And like not get to solutions. That's
Yeah.
Once we did it, it was incredibly useful and clarifying for me, beyond the value that it had to the dev team and the rest of the organization. Like really spending some time to do like goal setting and goal evaluation, and like figure out, we kind of developed a process that worked for us around defining sort of key values that we could measure projects against. And those, I think, understanding what those values are was really interesting. One thing that like comes to mind for me is like, I actually think that maybe one of your company's core values might be like, we are flexible and nimble, right? And so it may be that when you look at a potential a potential problem that needs to be solved, or a potential project that you take on, maybe one of the things that you like evaluate that project on is like, does this further this value of like, we are quick to react and able to like be a really nimble team, right? Like that can be something that like is a formal evaluation criteria for projects, right?
I like that.
It doesn't have to go away, but it may also be that like one of the things is a little bit more focused on like, stability, or some other value that like balances it out a little bit, or like or recognizes some of the challenges that you're having around like um maybe feeling a bit unmoored, right? Because and that's coming from my own experience as well, is like, I think a lot of small teams, the reality is you're jumping around a lot because you can. Um and that like bigger teams don't necessarily have this same problem in the same way, because like they can't move in the way that we can, so like it doesn't even come up as an option. um but it's challenging. It's challenging to be jumping all over the place all the time, for sure. And that's like a real cost that like needs to be identified somewhere.
Well,
Definitely. And I think we're getting a lot better at it. We're getting a lot better at being focused and sort of asking those fundamental questions that John talks about. Is like, somebody comes to us with an opportunity or a thing that they would like, and we start asking those real core questions of, who is this for, and what problem does this solve? And if the answer is that it just solves one person's particular problem with the system or one person's particular use case, it's not necessarily something that should be taken forward. But, and I take this directly from one of your talks, John, which is you strip that back and you look at why this person is asking for this particular thing, and is there some sort of underlying problem under there that needs to be or could be solved with, again, potentially the lowest amount of effort or some real thought into fixing or altering something. But
yeah.
it's really interesting. It's actually kind of it's a bit like project management therapy. I feel like I'm being sort of talked out of my belief system here by two project managers. It's really funny because I kind of think to myself, or thought to myself, we just need that process, and we just need to protect that process, and then things will be less chaotic. But it's really, really interesting to hear you both say things like, yes, you need that menu of solutions, but you can't necessarily just adopt this and expect it to work for everybody. And I think I know that, because I know that the most difficult people to get buy-in from will be the people who have the ideas and want the things built to meet these certain pieces of our target market. But yeah, it's kind of also a little bit unnerving, because it's like, well, now we're gonna have to really look at ourselves and
Yeah.
build this kind of set of, I'm not saying that we're going to go away and do like a brand values workshop or something like that, but I think having goals and being able to measure them is definitely one of those kind of things that I would never have went that deep down by myself.
I think it's like I know it's a frustrating answer in some ways because it's like actually you have to go deeper and do something harder than implementing a new process, which is. But I do think though, like to your point, it's like what it forces you to do is drill into the actual source of the problem, which is the other people at the company who have these ideas, people who own the company, the people who are on the board of the company, the people who are executives at the company, and that you basically it forces this like reckoning with them, which is like to ask like, hey, what are we doing here? And I say that in a jokingly aggressive way, but it's like it really was like when I started with Chris, it's like I wasn't asking that out of formality. It was like I came into Internachi and was like, I sorry, I don't know what we're doing here yet. And so it's sort of like, well, let's prioritize these tickets and decide on the roadmap. And I'm like, in service of what? Like, I feel like I'm wearing a blindfold right now. I don't know, like, build a roadmap toward what? Like, I don't, and once we established that, it was like all these questions started answering themselves, and it was really interesting. This is a weird comparison, and I don't mean to talk about politics at all, but I was listening to this good interview with Ezra Klein the other day, who was like talking about like vague words that we use that don't really mean anything in politics sometimes. And he's like, yes, like I too want a more efficient government. Like in the abstract, I too want a department of government efficiency to exist as a citizen and as a taxpayer. The question is like efficiency toward what? Like we have to yoke that to a goal or else it's incoherent. And I think in the same way, it's a similar pattern here where it's like we want a more efficient process, we want more direction, we want more whatever. It's like direction toward what? I can't. It's so, and that's why I think like my some of my advice to I keep on harping on this, but like my advice to a lot of developers, I'm like, if the answer to that question is muddy in your head, you have every right to go to the powers that be and say, let's put something down on paper, please. Like it'll be so helpful for us to put something down on paper. And then when one of those other people comes to you and says, we'd actually like to do XYZ, you get to go, awesome, cool. Let's run that through the filter of this paper that we wrote together, and I find that to be incredibly clarifying.
To like, I think just to make this even more concrete, like I pulled up the spreadsheet that we use and let me just read the headings for you.
Yeah, do it, because this would also segue well into actually answering Dan's question of how do we do things, because this spreadsheet is step one in a lot of ways of how do we build a feature at Internachi.
Yeah, so we have basically a Google Sheet that John set up that's a list of projects that we have in Linear. And we have 6 columns in the spreadsheet. The first one is it improves financial stability. The second one is it improves life for our members. The third one is it makes our education platform the best in the world. The next is it improves the experience of working here. It's a decades-long investment in our future, and it's good for the world. So those are our 6 categories. We score each project on those 6 categories, and then we sit down and we do the impossible task of trying to estimate the project. And essentially what we do is we multiply the score by the estimate,
or
right?
divide it.
Or divide it by the estimate rather, such that really low effort projects that have high numbers in a bunch of those columns bubble to the top. And it's really interesting. It's been a really interesting process for me because it's kind of twofold. One is it's just incredibly clarifying to ask those 6 questions of each thing. Because I'm, in sitting down myself and sitting down with like the team of directors within the organization and just like really thinking about things, I'm quite confident that those 6 measures are like the guiding light right now. And so like just stepping back and saying like, okay, this doesn't really really move any of these measurably forward. Like, why are we talking about it? Like, it's easy to get caught up in, oh, this is a neat idea, but like, it doesn't actually solve any of the problems that we're trying to solve as an organization. Like, it's just a neat idea and nothing else. Like, that in and of itself is really, really helpful. And I think that, like, um as the CEO of the company, people expect that maybe I like have some grand unified vision of things, but like, I'm just as lost as everyone else is half the time, because it's like, it's impossible to keep all of it in your head, right? Taking the time to step back and like ask these clarifying questions of yourself is really, really helpful. But then the other really interesting thing is sometimes, like, a couple of projects have bubbled up to the top, is like, oh man, like, this was not on my radar as being important at all. But like, when you really think about it, yeah, maybe it's not a super important project, but it's actually quite low effort, and it like scores pretty high on a couple of these like measures. Um, we can knock this out in a cycle and have delivered a ton of value, instead of like, committing to this other project that like everyone's thinking about, but it's going to take us like 4 months to complete. You know what I mean? Like, um,
Yeah.
it's been a really interesting process for us, and it's not perfect, but it's been a really good place to start, and it's also just been a really good place to, for all those different things that we've been kicking around, like, uh it's been useful to just like assess each of them on this scale and decide, okay, how close to actually pursuing any of these should we really think we are?
Part of what I love, one of the things that I love most about the spreadsheet, which also, by the way, I made a copyable version that's just out there. So if anybody wants a copy of it, it's just, you can just email me at john@thunk.dev. I can send you a copyable version of it. But aside from the fact that it's just really like simple and lightweight, the conversations that it fosters are really good, because if you see the results and you don't like them, there's three basic ways for you to contest what you see. One of them is to say, I question your premise. Are these really the goals that matter the most? Which now we're into a conversation about goals. Or like, interestingly, like somebody on the InterNACHI team, Jess, who's great, she looked at this and she was like, this assumes that all of these goals are weighted the same. Is that true? Is financial stability actually the same weight as these other five? It's like, that's a very interesting question. Now we're into a conversation about our goals. Another way to attack it is to say, actually, you scored this thing as like a 4 on it's good for the world, and in fact, I think it's a 6 or what. So now you're in a discussion about how well do our goals actually, or sorry, how well do our projects actually meet our goals, which is a conversation that's great to have. And the third way that you could attack this is to say, I hate that this project got tanked to the bottom of the list because its estimate is so big. Is there a way to cut the estimate in half and do an MVP version of it to skyrocket this thing back to the top of the list? Which is another conversation that I love for people to have. So I love this framework because it basically, if you want to move something on the list, you have to have like one of three very like healthy product conversations.
I would actually argue that there's a fourth too, which is, if I score something as a 2 and someone else is like, I think that's a 5, it's another place to surface like a difference in understanding about what the project is, right?
Yeah,
Because
totally.
it could be that like I'm saying, oh yeah, this doesn't matter, like this doesn't impact this one goal at all. And someone else is like, what are you talking about? Like, because the way they're thinking about it in their head, like maybe the implementation they're thinking of, or maybe like the scope that they're thinking of actually does touch that side of the organization in a way that I hadn't even considered, or vice versa. And so I think like, it forces you to sort of like break down projects and talk about them just in like ways that as developers in particular, we don't necessarily talk about them all the time. Like we're talking about them in these more like conceptual value contexts rather than like the technical context. So I agree that the conversations that come out of the process are very useful, whatever they are.
So the next part that I think about with a lot of product management stuff, which Internachi is just weird because we don't have a designer, and so I don't really do this at Internachi. But even at places that don't have designs, I do generally. So I guess step 0 is like we maintain this list of all of the good project ideas, and they are not thoroughly scoped. They are like notions of projects, basically. And then we maintain and sort those to kind of determine what do we think actually matters the most based on the goals of the company. When we have time to pick up a new project, we look at this together, and we don't have to go kind of like sequentially through them, but we try to be pretty disciplined about picking ones from the kind of top 5 towards the top about what we want to do next. And at most companies, like I think it does really matter then to have a developer lead. I don't know, depending on the size of your company and like the organization of your company, I don't know, like maybe that's always the same person. I think it's good to like spread that around a little bit, especially if there's more than one project going at a time, to have like a lead who is responsible for making sure that, especially if you don't have a product manager, making sure that like all of as much ambiguity as possible has been kind of squeezed out of the project before we start writing code. And I think that can include like making little mock-ups just to show like, this is what this interaction means in my head. Is this what this means in your head? Like having something to show to non-technical people that can save you quite a bit of grief. But basically, it's like, I think I don't think you want to spend a month on this because you could waste a lot of time before writing any code. But I do think you want to have like get a lot of the ambiguity out. And I think allowing like one developer to like own that and kind of go figure that out and ask hard questions, write down their hard questions, keep like a log of all the hard decisions that were made about this feature, write up a good document. Again, I think that this can be a plain text document. That's what I almost always use. But having one person be responsible and giving them an allotted amount of time to say, go take this thing from like vague concept to MVP feature that we can actually ship, that's like finishable and has a definition of done and has some mock-ups to demonstrate how it actually works. I think that's a pretty critical step.
I think that's really interesting that you mentioned that. Is I've mentioned that, you know, we have three sort of senior people. We have 2 sort of mid-level developers, and one of the things that I've been thinking about during all this is that the idea of, you know, should we be treating our product team as a bit more of a client, maybe? And maybe this is just because, you know, this is what I did for 6-7 years before I worked here, but is, you know, a lot of the things that you do when you're a contractor or when you're a freelancer is you spend a lot of time trying to extract that information from the stakeholder on the project. They make a request of you. They say, can we add this feature? And I say, sure. Why do you want to do that? And you start at the beginnings of everything, and you start trying to extract. And there's obviously a little bit of maybe I don't want to say bias, but you know, we all know our system, we all know our kind of company's goals. So maybe people aren't asking enough questions around these features as they're being added or requested. And the other thing I thought was, is this something that we could all be doing, is, you know, rather than just me trying to extract those details and trying to squeeze all the ambiguity out of something and writing a really good document and then handing that document off to somebody whose job is to go and make that feature. Is it maybe a good thing for that person who will be working on it, even if they are a little bit more junior,
Yes.
to start working towards that? And obviously they don't have to do that alone. Like that can be, it could be them and a senior, but I've been very I don't want to make everybody in the team a project manager. You know, I don't want to say everybody has to be their own project manager because we have enough to do, and it seems a little unfair, but also at the same time, maybe that would be a really great way for us to work as well.
And some people might be really good at it. I mean, I'm working with one client right now with somebody who they were like, oh, we don't have a person to kind of lead this. And we we're like, well, what about the relatively junior, newer person? And they put them on it, and it turned out that they just have a real talent for this. And it's a different kind of skill set. But yeah, like, I mean, back to that original idea of like, what does it mean for me to like fully scope this thing, document it perfectly, and then hand it off to somebody else who then has to go like get inside of my brain and depend on the writing that I did in order to do things perfectly. It's like, how often have you seen that work really well? I haven't seen it work like almost ever. So I love to have like whoever is like primarily responsible for the code that's going to be written is like super involved in the scoping process. And it can also spread the load on like leadership demands, that whoever is the senior developer on the team is not singularly responsible for doing basically all of this product work. And it brings more people into the process earlier to ask hard questions about it.
Yeah, I have a question though.
Go for it.
Just sort of clarifying question. Typically, and maybe you're all over the place. I know we are on this. So, but like typically, do you find that your team as a whole is like working towards one or two major features, or do you find that you're like, there's 5 of you and there's 5 features happening in parallel, or like that you like all work on the same feature and ship it and then move on? Like, do you find that you guys operate consistently in one of those modes, or is it kind of depends on the circumstances?
Yeah, there's definitely no consistency. It completely depends on what is coming up and what is the next thing to be released. So at the minute we're barreling towards this deadline, and we have pretty much everybody working on separate pieces that we know are intertwined, but we're having a lot of conversations where we sort of, we'll get together and be like, we know that our 3 pieces are coming together at some point, so we want to make sure that we're all aligned on this. And there's a lot of Miro diagrams going on, and making sure that we're all coming up with the best and we're not duplicating work and things like that. And it's really, really nice. Yeah, we don't really have, but then every now and then we'll have something where we'll maybe I'll be working on the back end of a feature where somebody else is building the front end out. We don't tend to. One of the things that I think everybody loves about the small team part is that you get to do all of the pieces of the app. You get to do the database design, you get to do the front end, you get to do a little bit of CSS and making it look nice and making it look polished, and you get to do the Laravel side and the architecture side. And I know I enjoy that. And we've tried to do this thing where we've given people roles, and then those people have very quickly sort of thought, I kind of miss writing Laravel code. Can I come back and write some Laravel code? And it's like, hell yeah, of course you can. Like, I love it so much. Why would I deny you it? So, we're all a team of full stack developers. We kind of, there are a few people with sort of domain knowledge of certain parts of the app that they kind of get pigeonholed, but that's something that we're working to address as well. We're going to try a lot more sort of pairing to try and bring everybody else up on each other's sort of domain knowledge areas. But it's kind of a natural thing. But yeah, there's no real consistent mode of attack for us. It's just kind of who's the best to do this, who do you think will, who will enjoy this, who might not enjoy this, but we know that we can trust them to get it done. And this is a really boring piece of work, but it needs to be done. So who's the best person, etc., etc. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, it's never.
Yeah, I was just curious because I think it does impact kind of how you think about think about splitting up the
projects,
the tasks, right, or the projects. Because at Internanchi, we have gone through periods of time where we've tried to like really be everyone all in on one feature. And there's a lot of really like, I don't know, really nice things that come out of that because, I find the review is so much easier because like everyone's kind of already on the same page by the time the code gets to review, and it's easier to pair because everyone's in the same sort of headspace, bounce ideas, uh, and that's been really great. But at the flip side, it means that um, you're also now even more so having to make trade-offs around like what we're committing to, because we're down to like one project per cycle instead of a couple. So it comes with trade-offs, and we're actively exploring right now sort of like what how does it work for our team if we try to um kind of each be leading one specific thing, um and working together on it, but like each person is kind of in their own like lane a little bit. And it's just kind of an interesting experiment to see sort of the difference between those two, because I can see how both of them work in different ways for us. I don't know if we're going to commit to one or the other always, but um, I don't know, just changes how you think about some things.
We
I
have
also
some
think.
kind
Oh,
of
sorry.
natural. Sorry, John. Sorry.
No, go. You go
we.
ahead.
I was just going to say, Chris, we have some natural lines that kind of form because of this sometimes, because we have people. We have 3 people work in the UK and 2 people they live in Canada, opposite ends of
Mm-hmm.
Canada. So the time zone stuff kind of comes into, we have people who are out of sync with us by X number of hours. One of our developers, he comes online at sort of, sometimes 3-4 p.m. in the UK, and it means that I'll check in with him, but then I'm sort of taking off and leaving work for 6 of his hours of his day. So these
Yeah.
individual projects and his ability to progress things uh, mean that it kind of lends itself nicely to being able to split up into little silos of certain things. And we always have crossover, and we always make sure that we have crossover. And I'm terrible for working late anyway. So there's been a sort of, the odd 8 or 9 p.m. huddle on Slack talking about getting questions answered so he doesn't get blocked by things. But that's kind of one of the reasons that we end up with that kind of split between, I don't want to call them teams, but between certain sets of developers, is it kind of naturally formed strangely along those lines.
Makes sense for
Yeah,
sure.
it does, and it works for us, which is great. Yeah, definitely works for us. Sort of, we have that developer as well, knows a lot about certain sort of experimental things, little projects that we've built that are outside of the main app, that we build as sort of idea validation stuff for the agency side. So he knows a lot about those as well. So he gets to kind of, sometimes he might have to go off and work on something that they've asked for, and because it's completely outside of everybody else, we don't have to have a 3-hour long meeting to discuss how it looks on a Miro board or whatever. So it does work really well for us that way. So that's one thing that I think we really do well, and that Richard, our other developer, does really well as well.
The only thing I was
So
going to add to that was this: that I think it really does matter to capture the work involved to scope and design. Like if there's a designer, that there's a design ticket. If there's a person whose job it is to make the documentation and scope of this thing really clear, like give them a ticket to do that, to like show that there's work. This is work, right? And sometimes I've seen like some dev teams be like, well, tickets are about like the code we write, and it's like, right, but in order to write code well, there's like perhaps a day of like scoping and planning that goes into that. So it's like, why not account for that as part of the work? And I've seen that also be helpful with like, suppose that you and Chris were like a 2-person team. You could do something where it's like there's 2 projects that are going to happen. Maybe they'll sort of overlap in the timeline, but like Chris is responsible for one and Dan is responsible for one. Maybe we're working on Dan's project right now, and Chris is even doing tickets on Dan's project, but Chris also has a ticket which is go scope out the next project, and so Chris gets to like carve out some time out of his cycle to do that, and then you could go back and forth. So it's like you can have it be where it's like it's not as if you being the developer lead on a project means you're going to do everything on it. And in fact, you might be like a support player you could be a senior developer who's like a support player on somebody else's project while scoping out a bigger and harder project with the rest of your cycle. So I think there's a lot of ways to like mix and match that, but like it's helpful to decide who the dev lead is on a given project and give them like allotted time to do that part of the work well. Is my only last thought on that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's really important. I can't remember if it was from one of your talks that I was watching, John, but make the work visible. I think was that one of yours? And I often think about that is, and I don't want to step too far back into a weird sort of meta discussion, but a lot of people have different ideas of what a ticket or an issue in linear or whatever system is for. Support people think of it as a kind of a problem that has been reported. We maybe think of it as, for a project, we'll break it down into 10 or 15 tickets because we have these logical breaks that we make, build the database table, build the controllers, write the tests, all this sort of stuff. But product people, the product side, break things down differently to us as well. So it can be quite difficult. So maybe even kind of defining, what a unit of work is. I don't want to step too far back again. It kind of feels kind of too meta discussion-y, but I think making it visible is definitely one of those things and it's one thing that I think what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot more work goes into a project than, the number of tickets on a project does not necessarily reflect all the work that needs to be done. And I think it's way too easy to look at a project, think that's only got 12 tickets, so we can knock that out in a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you are right, making this whole sort of scoping, measuring it against the goals is such a good. Yeah, I'm definitely going to need a copy of that spreadsheet. That's definitely.
I'll send it to you right after
that. Amazing, thank you.
It's funny that you say that. I mean, this isn't exactly. I think the point that if a project only includes the like dev work tickets, that it doesn't represent the actual work that you have to complete, I think is 100% true. I think it's also really interesting because John and I just spent probably an hour and a half talking about the very specific problem of like if a like how do you deal with the fact that like the problem statement that comes from one person, like the difference between an issue that someone is trying to resolve or a feature that someone is requesting or a problem that someone's trying to resolve through a feature request or whatever it is. The difference between that and ultimately the tickets that go into linear, right? Because those are fundamentally two very different things. It's like for someone on my education team that they might say like, I just got off the phone with someone at the state licensing board, right? And they need to have this new approval number listed on certificates that we print, right? And that's what they care about, is that this approval number shows up in the certificates, right?
Yeah.
From the dev side, it may mean that like, okay, we need to update like the certificate rendering pipeline, and then we need to like make a change to the licensing system to support like this new field. And then like we need to add some sort of verification process that ensures that like if a certificate requires this field, that the certificate's coming through a department that like has this licensing, all and
which
it
is
may
all
be
gibberish to them.
right.
Yeah.
Right,
They don't
exactly.
care about that. Yeah.
And it's always this question of like, okay, do like do we just take their ticket and change everything about it to represent the work that happens at the dev team? That's not super helpful, because now the actual problem that this person is trying to get solved kind of gets lost in the process. And it's just like a really interesting issue to me, because fundamentally those are just two totally different things, right? It's like they're connected, but they are we figuring out how to represent both of them in the same or in systems that work together well. It's like a whole other project management question that is like really hard to get right, I think.
Yeah, and I think I was sort of thinking the whole time you were speaking, I was like, well, the difference here is where has that request come from? So I couldn't help but liken it to support tickets that we get. They come into Linear, and then if there's a piece of work that is required to fix a particular problem, like if it's a bigger problem than just, oh, it's a bug and we'll change this, we don't necessarily change that ticket to be, there might be comments underneath it like, oh, well, actually, this is a bigger problem than we thought. We have to do this, this, and this. But we don't necessarily change the ticket around or add a bunch of sub issues. Maybe we kind of just build the work and go do what we need to, and then update that ticket so that the requester can update the customer. And then I was like, well, that's different when you're building a project, because you start with, at least we do at the minute, is we start with, here's the thing that we want to build. Here's the sort of scoped out document that we have that describes the feature. Now let's start building tickets. So you start building tickets that are very abstract, away from the problem. It's like, build the database, and you might have a few notes in that issue about like, oh, here's off the top of my head what I think we should do for this approach. We need to use this, this, and this. But then that's a really interesting thing, because you sort of think, well, that ticket is just a piece of work that somebody needs to do. It doesn't represent the problem. And when do those two things diverge? At what point do those two things diverge, and is it helpful to diverge them? And I see a lot of, and I keep coming back to Shape Up, and it's not because it's not because I have any kind of bias or anything from it. It's just that it's literally the most recent thing I've read, so it's kind of freshest in my mind. But they have this thing where they sort of say, don't go and create to-dos for every piece of work. Start building, and then as you start building, you'll come across some of these questions that then might require you to make a sort of higher level list. And it's not something that we've done. It's not something that we did even back in sort of my agency days. We actually didn't have tickets back then, but we did have, to-dos for everything that we needed to do. And yeah, it's a really interesting question. And it is an art in itself to be able to translate a requirement into, how we're splitting this work up.
Yeah.
Again, and if you've got multiple developers working on it, you could maybe use the each developer as a way to split the tickets or something. But I'll take this so that you don't cross over or something, or there's so many possible ways that you could split a project up into pieces that it's probably a whole podcast on its own. And I'm not volunteering for that one, definitely not. Before anybody says anything, but yeah, it's a whole thing, isn't it? And I'm always in awe of when I've worked with some really good project managers, and I've worked with some really really poor ones, and I'm always in awe of the really good ones and how they manage to make it look effortless and really break things down to a place where it feels like you can just get on with your job of building things, and they can kind of deal with the rest and make sure that it still meets the requirements. It's when you get a good one, it's a whole different world. Definitely.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been chatting for a while. I'm happy to keep on going. But I want to step back and just say, like, I think we've touched on a lot of really interesting things. If you like sort of close your eyes and think about the intention that you came in with, like, is there anything that's still kind of like tugging at you, or is there anything, either of you, John, like, is there anything that you're like, I came in prepped to talk about this thing and we haven't gotten to it, or I don't know, just like, let's take a moment to step back and ask the question, like, is there anywhere that we want to make sure we get to before things start to wrap up?
I'm more interested in Dan's answer.
All right. Okay. Like I said, I wasn't stepping into this expecting everything to be solved by the end of it. I think I just wanted to have a really interesting discussion with two people who were in a similar position to me. It's not something I get the chance to do very often, so I think we talked through a lot of stuff. I think there'll be a bunch of pieces of this, if people can't identify with all of them, there'll be a bunch of pieces that people can identify and things that they can take away. I know I've got a plan in my head for what I'm going to be doing, Monday morning, and the
Are
things that,
you willing to share it? I'd be curious to hear what your like takeaway is right now.
well, like I say, I think I came into this and I was kind of secretly hoping, I was like, John and Chris are going to give me the secrets to, here's this process that we use, and you should totally just do this, and everything will be amazing. And I knew my naive part of me was thinking that, but I think I knew really that wasn't going to be the case, because life is just not that simple. But I think one of the things is that we definitely have to take a step back and look at everything that we decide to build, before we start to build it.
Mm-hmm.
We're often asked about our roadmap, and I think we never have a really good answer because we never really know what kind of opportunities are going to present themselves in this sector. The nonprofit sector is a very strange one because it's full of possibilities, but every company is very, very risk averse and scared of technology. So we have to kind of build these things that can deliver results and then prove that they work, and then convince people to change and adopt the technology, which is a whole challenge in itself. So I think stepping back, John, we are definitely going to make use of that spreadsheet. We are definitely going to be sitting down and having a long chat about let's get our next set of features put into this, and let's look at the values that we want to build this company on and deliver things for, and then I think, and I'll have to chat to the team. I'm not going to force anything on anybody, but I do think that giving people a bit more kind of room to be their own project leads, I think that would be a really interesting thing. I think people getting to a point where they can extract the information that they need out of the stakeholder without having to use me as a middleman, because I can't keep it all in my head either. As you've said, you can't keep 4 or 5 projects worth of information in your head at the same time. I think that might be something we'll do. And yeah, retrospectives. I think I decided that one before I even came on the podcast, just based on the answer everybody gave me to my Bluesky post. Retrospectives and, really tracking what people are saying and then coming back to it and making sure that we've done something to try and address that problem. Whether it's worked or not is a different thing, but we'll, keeping that sort of cycle of constant feedback and trying to address it and making sure that, something isn't on our list of things to address for six retrospectives, because obviously there's a problem there. But yeah, I think that pretty much sums up what I've got planned, I think.
Yeah.
Would you like to would you have any advice when it comes to any of those?
All of the advice I have about retros are in that talk that I did.
Yeah. It was definitely that talk that tipped me over the edge. I mean, I think 3 different people said do retros when I asked that question originally, and I watched that talk, and the whole thing about, I think even some of the little things that you were saying, like have different people take notes each time, potentially have somebody different leading it every now and then. I think because, I talk way too much, and I think my team probably gets sick of hearing my voice, but I would love to get them to, to try and lead that as well. I think that would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, it's like, it's funny. I'm realizing I want to do that talk again. I have by giving it once, I feel like I did a retrospective with myself about what I want to do differently next time on that talk. But this is this has given me a new angle into it, which is like, when you ask like, what process should we use for a small team? Part of me is like, the true answer is you actually have to do something much harder, which is like deep self-examination and a bunch of hard conversations with the powers that be, and that will end up like, that is the upstream problem of your processes. And if you can solve those, you'll not only solve your processes, you'll solve a whole bunch else too. But it's like, I don't know. I have this vivid memory when I was a kid of like, I spilled a glass of milk or something at the table, and so the table was covered in milk and it was dripping out of the ground. And my mom was like, "Go get a rag, get the." And I started cleaning the floor first, and she's like, "Aha! Let me teach you an important life lesson. You're gonna want to start with where the mess is coming from,
problem.
And then and it feels sort of like that." I mentioned my mom a lot in these talks. I'm wondering if that's not a coincidence.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
One other thing that I would say, that I keep on coming back to because, I don't know. I like to think, I have ADHD, and a important part of surviving the world with ADHD is relying heavily on processes, right? And the more predictable and consistent those processes are, the easier they are to follow, and the more likely they are to happen, right? So I just know that when I go through the world, I'm constantly looking for how can I make things consistent and like predictable, because that is how I will survive the world. And I think that I go into these kinds of conversations often with the same sort of mindset of like, okay, let's just define a process. Like, let's come up with a single unified theory that like applies to everything, unilaterally, so that I can just like be in my like comfort zone of knowing that like, okay, we have a process, we're going to stick to the process, and everything's going to be perfect because we have this process. Spoiler alert, that's not how the world works. And I think it's even more important when you're in a small organization to understand that like processes only only get you so far. And in fact, the people that like these processes, like the people that are enacting these processes are just so much more important, right?
Yeah.
And so I think like, kind of going back to that original story that you were talking about, this agility that your group has, just like you don't want to give that up, right? You don't want to
No.
give that up for
No.
some sort of rigidity. In the same way, I think it's just like really important to remember, yeah, establishing a good process is great and it really does help a lot of people. And the larger the team gets, the more you have to sort of accept the trade-offs that come with that, because the benefits, become more and more valuable. Like the types of things that I have to think about as for our organization as a whole, right, which is much bigger than our dev team, have to be more process heavy, because there's multiple tiers of sort of management and all these other things at play. But I think like if you can just get everyone on the same page and then like establish trust and like rely on people's like intuition and doing what's best rather than what is like exactly in adherence with like whatever system you follow.
Yeah.
Like that's also, I think, really important, because otherwise, yeah, you start to get to a place where people resent the process instead of like appreciate it, right? It needs
Yeah.
to be something that helps people, not just like
Yeah. It becomes another
something that's
obstacle,
there.
doesn't it?
Yeah,
It becomes
it
another.
can,
It can't. Yeah.
right?
It can be a really helpful thing, but yeah. And
Absolutely.
I'm the same, Chris. I think that's possibly why, I also ADHD, and I think I come into things thinking, do it this way because it sets us up for the best chance of success with the least amount of divergence from it. And
Mhm.
yeah, I'm the same. I just kind of have to slowly realize that the world doesn't work like that, but unfortunately. But at the same time, I'm kind of glad it isn't all just rigid, and there's no fun in that, is there? Really,
Yeah,
sometimes.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a balance, everything is just finding the right balance.
yeah. Well, thank you very much both for your insights. It's been lovely to speak to you both. Lovely to speak to some people who feel like know what they're doing. That was meant as a
I don't, I
compliment,
don't
but
know I would say that, but
yeah. Well,
We're certainly trying hard.
yeah,
we're
yeah. I
trying
think
hard.
you're
Yeah.
projecting an aura of competence, which is excellent. Yeah, thank you very much, both. It's been a really illuminating discussion.
It was
Awesome.
fun.
Yeah. Before we stop, is there anything that either of you want to plug or shout out or point people towards before we call it?
No, I don't think so. Big
Yeah.
shout out to my team because they're all absolutely amazing, and I know they're probably gonna watch this just so they can hear if I've said anything about them. But big shout out to them. They are absolutely amazing, all of them. Really great people. But apart from that, no.
I'll just say to shill for 10 seconds that we've been doing enough. We've kind of brought on enough of this part-time fractional product management work that I can't do all of it anymore, which means that we've brought in some really good other people. And one of them is like a person who I used to work with who's a lot better at this than me. And so if you are desirous of part-time product management work or some like short-term consulting or anything like that, we have some really awesome people in house.
All right.
Yeah, thank
Well,
you.
thanks for hanging out, guys. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you both. Have a great afternoon. It's evening. It's evening here, so my brain's breaking. But have a great afternoon.
Close
Day.
enough.
Yeah, close enough. All right.
Cheers.
Thank you both.